Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul, but no time for all the crap today. I'm here at the UN. It's UN Open Source Week in New York City. Been a lot of fun this week, and while I was here, I had at least one conversation over coffee, over lunch, where I was like, this has to be on the podcast, but I don't have time to make a whole recording. So instead, what I did is went out and bought this little tiny mic. And now I'm sitting on a couch at IBM's offices on the community day with our good friend, Andrew Nesbitt. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm a little bit tired. It's been a long week. There's been more conversations than I would normally have in a month, but I am excited to talk to you, Richard.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you. So there was a time factor on this, which is why we're having this short mini podcast. This is a new format where we haven't tried before, where I'm going to try to put a jingle on the front and hopefully have the content front-loaded. So right out of the gate, Andrew Nesbitt, you are one of the founders and makers of Ecosyste.ms, which ecosystems is an easier way to call it. It's a giant registry of all sorts of dependencies. It's a registry-of-registries. You are like the person who's looking over all of the wizardry in the kingdom and deciding which spells work and which spells don't. Recently, you've been given access to some pretty powerful AI models. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. So, as you say, I have been sat on a lot of open source data, and that data turns out to be a really useful map to kind of point out which are the most critical open source projects. And then when all of the new kind of high security AI models started popping up, everyone was kind of like, okay, well, we need a map. We need to work out, like, we have a certain limited amount of time with these models, and we need to decide which packages we're going to scan first and how to prioritize the kind of security efforts, because we have to move quite quickly because we don't know how long we're going to have access to these models. And we don't need to get into the politics of exactly what's going on there. But what I then kind of basically tried to do was take the most critical projects. Like Ecosystems has an index of these packages are the most depended upon by 300 million open source repositories, and then try and slice those 10,000 projects down into, kind of split them in half and say these projects are actively maintained and are well up to date. They look like they have kind of good governance, good security practices. And then these half of the projects look like they're basically unmaintained or dormant or maybe completely dead, but yet still very heavily used. It turns out those projects are in a really bad state, and they not only have like a fairly easy way of finding security problems because these projects haven't really seen any updates in a few years. Like I would say the median age to a release for a lot of these projects is about 2 years. So these projects haven't had releases in 2 years or more. And those things, you would think, oh, they're really heavily used, right? They're still kind of Linus's law says, like, if these things are open source and they're heavily used, then they will have a lot of eyeballs on them. But turns out there are a lot of projects that are heavily used as transitive dependencies, which are basically invisible to a lot of people. They're not requiring them directly in their code. They're just picking them up indirectly through their package managers as transitive dependencies. And no one has been looking at them. No one has been doing security audits at them, because there aren't that many security people in the world that are skilled enough to be able to do security audits on open source projects. And they're busy looking at the much bigger, more important, more risky kind of headline projects like curl and Postgres and Elastic and all these different kind of big chunky projects and often projects with bounties or with big enterprise customers that are directly using them. The individual small packages have basically never reached the point of being like, okay, well, we'll send the security engineers and researchers to go and look at them. Once you have AI models where the only blocker to these things is a limit on how many tokens you have and how much compute you have to be able to run them on, everyone suddenly realizes, oh no, we can, not just us be able to scan these things for security problems, but anyone can. And it turns out one of the biggest things that kind of came out of these announcements, Mythos and Codex Glasswing as well, is that really inspired a lot of people to try looking for security problems using any LLM, not just the frontier models. And they can do fairly effective finding of those things. So now you're in a place where, every project that is critical, regardless of if it has had attention in the past, now needs to have attention. And so in my testing, I found maybe 1 in 2 of these dead and abandoned yet critical and heavily used projects have serious security vulnerabilities.
That was 1 in 2, not 1 or 2.
Yeah, 50% of them that I looked at, which I looked at around 3,000 projects, and across many different ecosystems this is. So it's not just one language. And even finding things in Rust projects and Go projects where you might think like, these things have much better threat models and kind of designed to be safe. But often the security problems aren't just the traditional kind of like, we got memory problems or the kind of like corruption that you can see in some more older languages, but lots of logic problems that can produce security escalation issues, especially when you start chaining different vulnerabilities together across the dependency tree. And then you run into a problem of going, okay, well, we can find loads of security problems, but the other half of that challenge is a lot of these packages are basically unmaintained and the maintainers don't seem to be there. So if we try to send them security vulnerability reports or we try to get patches released as new versions, there's no one there on the other side. We're basically kind of, everyone is treating these projects like they're fine, but they're really not fine. And even metrics like lib years often will say like, actually, you're okay with this project because you're on the latest version. So you don't have like a metric that tells you this is bad. The problem is that that project hasn't had a new release published to it in years. That hasn't had a security audit on it. And how do we get that downstream? How are we able to have a release published so that Dependabot can sweep through and send everyone a PR to bump them to the latest version? Most package managers, especially language package managers, don't have the ability to kind of auto-inject patch files that come from a security advisory. So you're basically left in a state of like, great, well, we found these security vulnerabilities and we can't get them into hands of end users automatically. So they're going to have to do a lot of work. We're going to have to do a lot of education to try and get them to learn about the risks involved in a lot of their transitive dependencies that they're running.
So, Andrew, you're saying that a lot of open source is underfunded. A lot of it is now unsecure. We already knew that. Why does this matter now?
Well, this matters now because of kind of this escalation of using LLMs for initially finding security vulnerabilities to fix them. People can also find security vulnerabilities to abuse them and to use them and attack with them. And they're getting better and better and trying kind of like to build harnesses explicitly to then use those vulnerabilities to attack people's websites, their phones, their all different kinds of bits of open source software that they're running. And we're in a completely internet connected environment. Everything is exposed online. It's basically become a little bit of a war of who has the most tokens to be able to find vulnerabilities and then find projects that use those bits of open source, or if those open source projects are running online, and then try to take advantage of it.
You mentioned a 90-day grace period at some point. What is that?
So traditionally in kind of security coordinated disclosure or responsible disclosure, you would give projects essentially, I'm going to tell you that I found a security vulnerability in your project, and I'm going to give you 90 days to coordinate with your other, say, companies that use your software or other dependencies that are closely linked with you so that everyone is ready when we release and announce the patch for fixing this vulnerability to make sure that everyone is able to upgrade all at the same time. And this 90-day window is kind of a traditional thing. Sometimes different projects will have different levels of windows and different security researches as well. Often it depends on the severity of the vulnerability, because sometimes getting patches shipped out to, say, hardware devices can be much more difficult to actually be able to roll those out. If there was a vulnerability that affected your car, like how often do you do a software update on your car? Yep. Not very often. The problem now is that vulnerabilities can be found very quickly. People are basically watching every commit in every open source project and scanning those and saying, like, does it look like there were security vulnerabilities introduced here? To the point of basically saying, like, if an LLM finds a security vulnerability, you have to assume that other people with the same LLMs can find those vulnerabilities too, therefore it's public. And so people have started to say that the window of kind of responsible disclosure is now like negative number of days. Assume that it's already out there and in public and being exploited, which is just terrifying.
So open source is everywhere. It's in the phone we're using to record this right now. It's in my computer. It's in your computer. What can we do?
So there's kind of a couple of things I would say. One thing is, if you're deploying and kind of working in software as a developer, consider trying to prune your dependency trees, reduce the amount of excess dependencies that you have in your software stack. You should also ensure that as many of those dependencies and applications that you're running are up to date, and you keep up to date with them. You're following their vulnerability feeds or their release feeds to know when new things are landing, because often there are significant vulnerabilities that are being discovered in projects every single day, in open source projects that you might run. Make sure you're also keeping your devices up to date. Anytime that you get a phone software update, it's a good idea to update that as soon as possible. Whereas previously you might have been like, I really don't want to do that because it might take my phone offline for 10 minutes and I don't want to do that. Or it might break some installation on my Mac because I don't want to kind of have to. I
used to wait like 3 months before I got the newest version because I didn't want to have to change the UI. You're saying stop doing that, just update it.
Definitely just update it. For anything significant like that is a really good idea to break that habit and start updating things. The other thing you can do is go and try and help the projects that you use and donate kind of your effort. But rather than just piling on and kind of like say, I'm going to point an LLM at my dependencies and try and find some vulnerabilities and send the projects those vulnerabilities, I think you need to kind of be a little bit more tactful, a little bit more respectful of the maintainer's time. They're often still volunteers. They don't have a lot of resources, and they are receiving many vulnerabilities per day. It's very intense right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are going to be maintainers that are just going to bail and say, like, this is too much. I'm doing this as a volunteer, and I don't want to deal with this level of anguish that I'm facing right now.
Daniel Stenberg just took a couple months of vacation, I believe, which I'm really happy for him. I hope he's able to rest.
And he's so the Summer of Bliss that Daniel proposed has actually been picked up by a number of other projects now as well. Yep. Image Magic, and a couple of days ago, Open Collective announced that they're going to do this with their open source platform as well.
Did not know that.
Yeah, only just recently announced it. Exactly the same idea, the Summer of Bliss of basically July, that many projects have been inundated with security vulnerabilities and want to be able to just have a break and have a summer holiday. And so think about how there are other ways that you can support those projects. It might be financially donating to those projects. It might be looking at if there are projects that, like, can you help them tidy up their dependency trees and do an audit of the kind of more holistic quality of the code And also for basically like doing kind of check-ins with maintainers. Like, how are you doing? What kind of support do you need? Rather than just trying to force yourself into a project and say, I found you more vulnerabilities, please try and fix those because, I need you to fix them right away. That's a bad idea. You're just going to pile on what is already an incredibly intense experience right now.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time today. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please update your dependencies. Please support your maintainers. Give them hugs, give them cupcakes, give them funds. If you like this type of podcast, I know there's been some wind in the background. I know there's been the honking of Madison Square Park. But honestly, I just thought it would be cool to try a bit of more on-the-fly thing. Let me know how you feel about it. You can email richard@sustainoss.org. At the same time, I will try and ask my editor how much he hates me for doing this. Thank you so much, Paul. You're the best. And thank you so much, Andrew, again.
Thanks for having me, Richard. This is always fun.
Take care.